and we were going to pick up where we left off. And I think one of the most important things I want to ask you, Maureen, is why does it matter that you actually talk about death ahead of time?
Well, in when you were talking about my bio, you said about the drama, trauma, and chaos. And this helps eliminate that. There will always be grief, there will always be sadness, and there doesn't have to be that drama, like the family arguments about what to do, and families never speaking to get to each other again because of these issues. It's chaotic, it's stressful when you don't know what the person wants and you're there and having to make a decision. And um, it gives families a plan. It gives families a plan to follow. And that I know firsthand is a great gift. But when you look at this, there's studies that have been done, and I think 95% of people, I mean, 100% of people know they're going to die. 95% know that it's important to have these conversations, but they haven't because the people that are ill and could be dying,
Yeah.
they don't want to upset their loved ones and burden them, and they don't want to make them afraid. So they don't say anything. Then the family members on the other side, they don't want to upset the person that's ill and dying. And so they don't say anything. And these beautiful conversations are lost forever. Things that could have been so meaningful and said, um, the things that could have been shared are lost. Having old feuds or old hurt feelings, taking care of that important business is lost by not having these conversations. But of the people that do know the importance, only 32% have actually had these conversations with those they love. And there's what's the statistic on how many people know they want to talk to their doctors about this? Yet only 18. I do know that. It's
Oh,
18% of people actually talk to their healthcare providers. It's a little bit better now. They'll ask you, "Oh, do you have advanced directives if you're
yeah.
going into the hospital or for any procedure?" Or, many people that are older, that are elderly or have a chronic life-limiting condition, they might ask about the POLST form, or it's called POLST, most, POST, the provider order for life-sustaining treatment, and they might go over that. But I was with a 92-year-old elderly man that they were asking if "Did you want CPR?" And he's like, "Well, heck yes, I want CPR." And they just were going to check the box. And I said, "Wait, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what CPR would mean for you." And after we did, he's like, "No, I don't want that." So, that's the value of these conversations, that people are afraid to have them. And it's usually on both sides. They don't want to upset the other.
Yeah.
And as a nurse, I was on the receiving end of many of those conversations that should have been had with the family members. And in my encouragement, some people had the conversation, some did not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're doing this and you're working with families now, how do you get this started? How do you have a process? How do you work with
I
people?
do. Yes, I do. I do it a couple different ways. We do group workshops for those that want that. And then one-on-one, we work through the paperwork. We work through, what's important to you. We talk about life values. What would your goals of care be? Um, we talk about death experience because that's really important to look back and what our experience with death is. Because most of us, I mean, there's some people that do death beautifully, and then there's the majority that do not, and they don't talk about it, they don't share. So really looking back at, like, what's your first experience with death? How did it make you feel? How do you process your grief around death? There's so many different things. How old were you when you experienced your first death? And those really are very impactful in going through this work. So we work through some of that first, and then we talk about, if you couldn't make your own decisions, let's talk about getting that person that you trust in that role as they call them, the forms are called healthcare powers of attorney, durable power of attorney for healthcare.
Yeah.
The people there, they could be called a healthcare decision maker, a healthcare agent, a healthcare surrogate. There's all different names, but it's essentially the person that would make decisions on one's behalf. It's always best to have a primary and then have a first alternate, and even some people have a second alternate.
Oh,
Um, and to really, I think if you do nothing else, that's one of the most important things. Choosing someone that you trust, that they're willing to talk to you about your wishes and what you would want done, but you have to trust them to also make decisions that you might have never talked about,
yeah.
and that you would trust that they would do what they would feel you would want based on how they know you. You should never just surprise anyone with this and put their name down and not ask them. Um, that's happened to me, and it was very stressful because we had never talked about any of this, and out of the blue, I and another man were equal, and we disagreed on what to do.
Oh,
So it was challenging. So that's why I always say primary, alternate, and first alternate, and then the second alternate. But the most important thing is that, yeah, you get the person that you would trust.
yeah. Well, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and you
And
ask them. Always
yeah,
ask. Did I say
yeah,
that? Because
yeah,
always.
yeah, and make sure that, yeah, I never thought about the second and the third alternative, right? I mean, I know that that was a different thing when my daughter was younger, that we had who would take care of my daughter, so we had like 3, just in
Yes.
case. But we
Yes.
also talked to them first,
Yes.
like, because things change, especially when she was younger, my parents, but then what happens when they get older, or if they
Right.
couldn't, so, having that sort of a backup and a backup.
Right. And, that's, guardianship. I shout that from the mountaintops too, but that's, like, what I do is beyond the will. That's all the
Yeah,
estate planning part. I'm beyond the will, and getting that done.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's
And
starting those conversations.
yeah, there is a next of kin hierarchy, and people don't realize this, but if, like that 63-year-old I mentioned, she had
Yeah,
4 children and no husband. Those 4 children were her equal decision makers, and they did not agree. And she ended up having no brain function. She ended up brain dead, and 2 of them wanted to take her off the ventilator, 2 of them did not, and she was kept on the ventilator because of that. It was really traumatic for the whole family, and 30 years later, I'm sure they're still not speaking to each other. It was so horrific. So, there's the next of kin, and that's what's hard. And, sometimes I'll give you a story. One of my nursing friends, from years ago that I've remained close to, I knew her mother very well, knew her sister. Well, her mother was older and was ill, and she called me all mad because her mom chose her sister as the decision maker, but she was the nurse. And how she was really upset. And I'm like, let's talk through this. What I know to be true about your sister, she can compartmentalize things. She's not as emotional. She's emotional inside, but she can compartmentalize and do task by task. And I said, "What I know about you is you love with all your heart, you wear your heart on your sleeve, and everything's emotions." And I said, "I think your mom wanted to protect you. And so what your mom needs you to do is to be there loving on her, rubbing her feet, holding her hand, reading, doing, and she needs your sister to make those tough decisions as they come, if they come." This is the what ifs, and so often you never even need this, but it's such a nice thing to have if you
yeah,
do.
yeah, no, that all makes sense.
So my
And I
friend did say, "Yeah, that makes sense to me." Oh, gosh, I never saw it from that point of view. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges about all of this talking about death, because people, the emotions are tied up, they've got different perspectives, um, and, they are coming at it from, you know, some are more practical, some are more, I can just imagine. So when you're really stepping into that, that's one of the things you have to, I not want to say negotiate, but you have to navigate.
navigate, yeah. And you have to pick someone that is strong enough emotionally to handle this because it is emotional. And I was my uncle's decision maker. His daughter is a bit older than me, but and she lives near me, but her 2 brothers had died. His wife had died, and she had been through a lot. One of the brothers had died. My cousin died when he was 24
Mm.
in a plane crash, and my uncle didn't wanna put her through that emotion, and, oh, he had moved down to Palm Desert from Seattle, and he was driving up and down the West Coast. He was in his 80s, late 80s, and we thought he'd be driving for years to come. Uh, but he didn't wake up one morning, and
Mm.
I was the person. But he had like, every time I saw him, we reviewed what he wanted. We brought my cousin into it. We had these conversations, and he had just been up to Seattle 2 weeks before he died and went over it again. And, one of the things, he had to live actively. He wanted to live independently. He wanted to be able to do all of his own activities of daily
Yeah.
living. The night before, I had talked to him, and he had just been to his golf kickoff luncheon for the season, and he was ready. He didn't wake up, but he didn't die. He wasn't dead. It turns out he had a big bleed in his head. And
Mm.
so I had to talk to the ER doctors, and they wanted to take him right away to surgery. And I said, "Will he be able to live independently?" "Well, no, but there's a 50% chance we can get him talking again." And I said, "It's not what he wanted." And, inside I'm dying because this is my
Yeah.
beloved uncle. And um, they just kept going. Is this, but there's a chance we can get him. I said, could he play golf? Well, no, but there's a, chance he can talk again. And I said, that's not good enough. And then I had to go through it with the neurosurgeon, and it was really hard, but he had given me such a clear map
Yeah.
to follow that was such a great gift to me,
Yeah.
because in my emotion, I didn't backtrack and say, well, wait, do everything you can to save him,
Yeah.
which happens every day. But I was able to honor his wishes, even though it was
Yeah.
really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously. Um, I mean, so, I mean, in your case, of course, with your family and bringing this up, but for so many, we already talked about it being like people just don't, they are afraid like to talk to each other, but it also sounds like this is like a blind spot that people don't necessarily even think about it. Um, I mean, what is your experience in that? Why is talking about it such a blind spot? Talking about death.
Because it's a blind spot, because it's hard to think about our own death, let's face it, you know? Um, and that's hard, and I think people there's also the belief, I've heard this, a number of times over the years, "Well, I don't wanna talk about that, that can manifest my own death, and
Oh,
I don't." And you know what? I'm like, "That is a true fear. I understand that that's a true fear, but, let's just have a little conversation." And when I've worked with people, when they get through that, they're like, "Oh, that wasn't hard at all." And we have laughter around it, we tears, some tears, but it's really, they all feel this sense of relief, like, okay, I've got it covered if anything happens. And that's the beauty of doing it while we're well, while we're healthy, and then visiting it. I always say visit it annually. Um, on your birthday, make it your birthday present to yourself, to make sure you have the right people in place. If anything, has your health changed, all of
yeah,
that. But especially when you have a major health diagnosis. But so many people wait till the moment of crisis and it's too late, or, talking about, so we go through all this working together. We put a plan together. What if you end up with dementia? There's a wonderful dementia directive. It's not legally binding, but it's a guide. If you
yeah,
have dementia, what would you want done in the early phases, the mid phases, the late phases? So those are guides for the family to follow, because none of us, we don't want to think that we could get dementia, but it sure can happen.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. I also really like the anniversary or, your own birthday gift because
Yeah,
things change.
things do change.
People that, um, you know, just your situation, the people around you, other people may have passed or moved, just not be involved in your life. Somebody
Right.
else is very active. So I think that's a really important piece because that's one thing, change is constant, right?
It
And
is.
really looking at that. So, I guess the last thing I would ask about is what should our listeners do next about
Well,
starting a conversation and talking
start
about death?
Yeah, there's things I would encourage people to there's something called a death cafe. You can
Yeah.
go there, death over dinner. There's all these different things out there, but, um, have the courage to have this conversation. And I will say what I really, work with people to get all their paperwork done, and then I give them a plan to take it to the family. It's only as strong as what those who matter to you know about. And it's
Yeah.
always best to come directly from the person making the decisions for
Yeah.
themselves. So we get all the paperwork in order and then tie it up with a family meeting. And the family meetings is can be as easy as saying, "Hey, come on over for pizza and beer. Come on over for cake and coffee. I have an important conversation that I want to have." And it is, it's going to be about what my wishes are. If anything should happen to me, I want you to know where this is. I want you to know where my financial papers are. I want you to know where all this is, all these important things. But I also want you to know directly from me, so you don't fight about what you think I would have wanted. And that is the value of having this paperwork done, but then having these courageous conversations with those that matter most to you, is
Yeah.
that you give them that gift, like my uncle gave me that gift, and he gave his daughter that gift. So, she knew too exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. I mean, this has been such a lovely conversation, Maureen. I think it's so important that people understand that. And I want to thank you for sharing why talking about death may scare you to death, but you need to do it anyway, to paraphrase. And I know that our listeners are going to want to learn more about you and how they can connect with you.
Well, the best way is to connect with me through LinkedIn at Maureen Curis, and then or go to my website, Radiant Morning, Mourning, like morning is in grieving.com, radiantmorning.com, and sign up for my newsletter. Or I do have a free giveaway. If you get in touch with me, I would be happy to send a conversation, how to get the conversation started.
Yeah, that's the most important thing to get the conversation started. So, Maureen, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in and stayed with us through our little technical glitches. You got to love that. And because this has been a really informative discussion, and it's really made me take a step and look at, even though I've had these types of conversations, it's like, yeah, it needs to be revisited. It's time. So thank you so much, Maureen. I truly appreciate you and everything you've shared today.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me.